Well, welcome to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings, but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. In today's table topic, the Black vote in the midterms. Lately, the number one question I am asked is, how do I feel about the midterms? And oftentimes it's asked with a lot of uncertainty in their voices because, they think about where politics are today and how unpredictable it has been in a long time. And just, the fact that typically the party who's in power is the party that loses seats. That tends to be the consensus going forward. There are also so many factions now, so many voting blocks and interest groups and issues that issue voters where there are people who simply vote based on their one issue. And all of that is fine. I mean, all of that is necessary and all of that has happened in the past. And in a climate like this, it's really no telling how the election will shape up. You really have no idea what's going to happen. People can create their trends and they can look at stuff, but there's so many things happening now that is not as common. Factions have always been a thing. However, there's the factions are now shifting, right? So you see voting blocks that were typically going in one direction that are now looking at another direction, and it's getting a little bit different. So with all of that happening and all those things occurring, it does pose the question of what would it look like? What is our midterm going to look like? Along with information that I've gathered from non-traditionally involved voters who are now getting involved, we really need to stop and think about where we are politically. There was a time when independents were the swing vote, but today they're not alone. There's a new swing vote, and it's called the Black voter. Now, before I share how I know this, I want to get some things straight. The Black vote is not a monolith. It's that it has never been a monolith. Even though we've seen majority of Black voters vote in the Democrat position, that doesn't mean that the majority of Black people tend to lean on the Democrat side. It may feel that way, but you just don't know. There are a lot of Black voters who are swayed into certain decisions because their livelihood is so deeply attached to it, but their heart may be going in another direction. So we've never been a monolith. We're also not some prize to be won and then put on the shelf until the next election cycle, which tends to also be the narrative when it comes to the Black vote. So if you really want to understand why the ground is now shifting, you have to stop looking at us Black voters through the lens of loyalty and start looking at us through the lens of expectation. Because for years, we have been tossed into one category of voters because we tend to lead with those expectations, but where we fall short is follow through. But we will dive deeper into all of that and those points towards the end. So if you want to know where the voting block is, we must understand where we have been. So here's a breakdown of how we got here and why the safe bet for Democrats is starting to look like a bad investment for a lot of our people. Before the mid 20th century, if you were Black and you voted, you were likely voting Republican. Why? Because the GOP was the party of Abraham Lincoln and the party of emancipation, of proclamation, and freedom. Black men were elected to Congress as Republicans, while the Southern Democratic Dixiecrats were the ones enforcing Jim Crow and poll taxes and the KKK's reign of terror. The movement started to crack during the Great Depression when FDR's New Deal offered economic crumbs that many of our people desperately needed. And by 1936, a majority of Black voters backed a Democrat for the first time. Even then, it was about economics and not social alignment. So you'll often hear about this switch that happened in the 60s, right? Which never really happened, but that's a different topic for a different show. Oh, but anyway, there was a shift that started in the 1940s. So while people think that the switch happened where all these Black voters started voting Democrat, all of a sudden was in the 60s. No, it was actually more closer to the 40s. But the 60s kind of changed the game because Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which would not have passed, by the way, without Republicans, along with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That's when you saw this huge influx of Black voters shift to the Democrat Party, but not all. I'm friends with a woman today whose family decided not to flip during that time. And they didn't because they saw the future dangers of supporting a party of handouts, supporting a party of dependency, and the effect that it would have on the future of Black families. But the 1964 Republican nominee, Barry Goldwater, he opposed the Civil Rights Act on states' rights grounds. So when people talk about him, they say that, he opposed the Civil Rights Act, he was racist, he was all these things. But really what it was is that he wanted to make sure that the act was passed through the states and not as a federal thing because of the fact that we, as Republicans, we believe in states' rights. We believe that every state should decide what works best for their families. And so, whether you agree or disagree on that, that is a Republican principle. And it doesn't necessarily mean he's racist because he believes in Republican principles and he holds to them as a Republican. But that was certainly the nail in the coffin for him because Black support for Republicans plummeted from around 30% to 40% under Eisenhower to practically zero. So for decades, the Democrat Party enjoyed 85% to 95% of the Black vote. They became the home, so to speak, for Black Americans. But home started to feel a lot like a waiting room where the promises that was never quite fulfilled got left. So we fast forward to today, and the conversation isn't about 1965 anymore. It's about rent. It's about grocery bills. It's about the feeling that liberal policies have hollowed out our inner cities while calling it progress. We're now seeing a historical shift significantly among young Black men. In 2024, Donald Trump and the GOP saw some of the highest levels of Black support for a Republican in generations. And here's why I believe that this whole vote Democrat or nothing, like all of these stupid slogans, all these things that people were saying, while that's now that spell that's now breaking off of people. Here's why. Because there are several reasons why this is happening. Number one, young Black entrepreneurs and workers are tired of being told that they need a handout. They want low taxes. They want less regulation. They want a strong economy. They're looking at their bank accounts and not 60-year-old history books. And they're starting to ask questions like, why are we advocating for illegal aliens and ignoring Black voters? That's a big deal. Matter of fact, that's a big discussion that's happening right now. There's a debate because you have the Congresswoman Pramila is it Jayapal? I think it's Jayapal, and then Ilhan Omar. Both of them are advocating for reparations for illegals. Now, mind you, I am not a fan of reparations at all because I personally believe that we've already gotten our reparations through policies that have created extensive amount of freedom that we now have as minorities. However, I do understand the frustration with Black Democrats who've been advocating for reparations, and then now all of a sudden they want to give reparations to illegals. So yeah, that's frustrating. But that's not the only reason why the spell is breaking. Let's continue. Number two, many in our community are naturally conservative. We've heard this over and over and over again. Well, we're seeing it now more on display, particularly when we talk about LGBTQ stuff. We value faith, we value family, we value hard work. And when the modern left moves towards these radical social agendas, they lose the aunties in the pews and the young men who value traditional strength. You saw right now, there's a state representative, I'm sorry, not a congressperson, but a state representative in Michigan who's a Black woman who was a Democrat. 5 years ago in 2020, she thanked President Trump for doing some things when it came to COVID. And then she got attacked heavily in her state while Governor Whitmore was a do-nothing and harming people. And she brought out something very interesting. She was like, a lot of people in our state didn't have water while Whitmore was forcing everyone to stay home. She said there were people that were walking to convenience stores to grab food day to day because they were under this strict stay at home policy when these people were suffering in their homes. And there was nothing that she was doing as a governor to help those people. So fast forward to 2026, and this woman has now left the Democrat Party because they have pushed her out. And her words, to be exact, was, "Do not push me into a corner." That's what she said. Do not push me into a corner when it comes to LGBTQ, when it comes to the abortion stuff. Like, just stop it. And they will not take no for an answer. With the Democrat Party is get in line or get out. So yeah, we've heard that we were traditionally and more conservative naturally as Black people, but I'm telling you now you're starting to see it because a lot of Black people are starting to buck the system because they're like, no, this is going way too far. There's also, number 3, a growing resentment towards the idea that we owe a party our vote just because of the color of our skin. You remember Biden? If you don't vote for me, you ain't Black. Yeah, Black folks are tired of that. Young voters are realizing that when a party knows they have your vote, that they don't work for it. And they certainly do not care about whether or not they fulfill their promises or not. Fourth and finally, whether people like it or not, the GOP's current brand of direct, unapologetic leadership, it resonates with particularly young men, young Black men, who feel the Democrat Party has become too focused on identity politics that doesn't include them. And I gotta throw something in here really quick, because we're focusing on men and people are wondering, like, why does it seem like Black men are leaving first? And I have to be completely frank with you. It's because of Black liberal women. Feminism has taken over the brains of Black liberal women. The number of Black liberal women who are leaving their husbands that are over the age of 40, and all of a sudden now they want to go out into the streets and see what's out there, is insane. And you have people like Michelle Obama that's pushing this false sense of independency while she's not leaving her husband. She complains about him all the time, but she's not leaving Barack. But yet, they're pushing this narrative that there's something you missed. That if you were a wife and a mother and young and you missed out on those years and you have to go out and go see the world and live in the streets, and there is nothing out there for you. So Black men are tired. They're tired of the repeated lack of submission that they get from Black women. There's always a constant debate. There's no accountability. I digress, but that is definitely an area that I'm seeing it, and it's not good. That is the unspoken truth that most people don't want to talk about. Then there's terms that you may hear or may not have heard about, but it's certainly playing a major role in the rise of the Black migration from the Democrat Party to the Republican Party. And it's this whole idea of respectability politics versus Black fatigue. Now, before I share how it affects the Black vote, I have to share how respectability politics versus Black fatigue debate is probably one of the most behind-the-scenes battles that are taking place right now in our community to date. But what is it? So there's these two forces that are in play right now: respectability versus fatigue. And what I call, instead of calling it Black fatigue, I'm calling it subculture Black fatigue. If you hear about respectability from the left, they will say that this is an old school or traditional approach. It's an idea that we have to act right or dress right or talk right in order for us to be forced or force the rest of the world to respect us. In their world, the logic is that this is a shield. That if I'm beyond reproach and if I'm the perfect citizen, and it's about protecting the group image to gain social and economic mobility. Well, the truth is, being respectful and having self-respect isn't a political position, or at least it shouldn't be. It's called personal accountability. And we believe in the power of the individual to transcend their circumstances through discipline and character and self respect. It's about assimilation into a society where there are cultural norms. And those norms have nothing to do with the color of your skin, but it has everything to do with how you want to be seen and represented. So, yes, there is a protection of a group image. There is a protection of the brand of the Black family that has been utterly destroyed. But yeah, there are a lot of Black people who want to see it come back. We're tired of being represented by the subculture. But then you have Black fatigue, which leads almost directly into this, right? Because when you don't have respect, when you have no one participating in respectability, then you get fatigue. And many say that this term was hijacked and that the original meaning was rooted in the idea of being tired of carrying the weight. It's those who feel like they don't want to audition to fit into society. As a result of this logic, we now have a new version of Black fatigue that's coming from Black people who are fed up with the ghetto, ratchet subculture in our community. You see, when you reject self respect or cultural norms of engagement, and you replace it with this notion that we can somehow behave however we choose, and it should be acceptable because it's our culture, when it's really not. The problem is that multiculturalism has caused more of a divide than a bridge. And this subculture of Black people who think strippers and harmful music and wearing lingerie in grocery stores and pajamas in the airport is running rampant. And now you have Black fatigue, meaning I have secondhand embarrassment. As a Black American, I'm embarrassed. So, and now you're hearing them call out this damaging subculture, and it goes hand in hand with politics, Republican politics to be exact. Many see that those who embrace respectful behavior have strong families, are closely aligned with real Black culture, and are also typically Republican. So now that you have this complete insider view of this topic, after the break, we're going to discuss what we have to overcome to fully realize this reality that Black voters are waking up. And what if I told you that Rosa Parks was not the person who started the bus movement, but was selected to be the face of it? And what if I told you that there was this gross and almost eerie connection to the Montgomery bus boycott and this recent Target debacle that Jamal Bryant has stirred himself up in? All of that and more after the break. We're just getting started. You're listening to The Janelle King Show right here on Extra 106.3. Don't leave the table. Welcome back to The Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And today's table topic is the Black vote and the midterms. Everyone's asking, how do I feel about the midterms? And they're asking with this fear in their voice because politics is unpredictable, and the experts are missing the biggest shift in history. Forget independence. There's a new swing vote in town. It's called the Black vote. And historically, we were the party of Lincoln. We were Republicans when the Dixiecrats were enforcing Jim Crow. And then in comes FDR's New Deal, and we started seeing the shift from the Republican Party to the Democrat side. And then we had the shift that took place in the 60s after the passing of the Civil Rights Act that happened, promising to make the Democrat Party the home for Black voters. But that home that the Democrats promised is now turning into a waiting room where promises never get fulfilled. So today, the conversation isn't about 1965. It's about the struggles of today, the rent, the groceries, and why we're prioritizing illegal immigrants over our communities. We're seeing that young Black men are just done with this loyalty and they're now looking for results. They're tired of just being the loyal voter with no results. But there's also a deeper battle that's happening amongst the Black community, and it's the fight between respectability politics versus Black fatigue. The left calls acting right a performance. I call it personal accountability. It's about discipline and self respect, standards that have nothing to do with the color of your skin and everything to do with character. And then there's Black fatigue. It's not just about being tired of the struggle as they try to make it seem. It's about being tired of the ratchet subculture and being sold as Black culture. Our people are tired of the secondhand embarrassment, and they're realizing that the path to a strong family, to a stable community, looks a lot like Republican politics. So now that you've gotten that view, there's some things that have caused this shift. So now I want to dive into what we must do to overcome and realize this awakening. And it's like we have to get over the gatekeepers. Because just like in the days of the civil rights movement, the gatekeepers are still here. And unfortunately, the agenda has not changed. And because I know that there are listeners who would like a clear picture on how the agenda is still the same and how the tactics are still being used to control, I'm going to do just that. What if I told you that there was an eerie linkage between the recent Target boycott led by, I put in air quotes, Jamal Bryant? But what if I told you that there was a linkage between the Jamal Bryant stuff and this Target boycott and the Rosa Parks Montgomery bus boycott? But the truth is, we love a good underdog story. We love the narrative of a spontaneous uprising. A line was crossed and the people stood up and the system bends to their will. We love that. It's a beautiful story. But most of the time, it's a myth. History is not made by accident. It is engineered. And behind every massive boycott that dominates your newsfeed in the history books, there is a boardroom, a war room, and a political machine. The outrage might be real. The grassroots passion might be genuine. But the movement is typically pure strategy. And oftentimes is a strategy selected based on what it does for those who are leading it rather than those who are supporting it. Let's look at the blueprint. Let's take the Montgomery bus boycott. The story we were sold is simple. A tired seamstress named Rosa Parks sat down, refused to move, and sparked a revolution. But Rosa Parks wasn't the first. She wasn't the second, or the third, or the fourth woman to refuse giving up her seat. Before there was Rosa Parks, there was Sarah Keyes, a member of the military who was in uniform who refused her seat. There was Irene Morgan. There was Orella Browder. There was Claudette Cloven, who was a 15-year-old girl who fought the cops who dragged her off the bus. But why didn't we get the Claudette boycott? Because Claudette was a teenager who became an unwed pregnant mother, and they didn't want her to be the face of it. They didn't feel like her story would be strong enough. So they got Rosa Parks, who was a trained activist, who was a local NAACP secretary. She had the perfect reputation. The moment she was arrested, the leaders didn't just get mad. They activated a network that they had been building for years. They printed thousands of flyers overnight. They had a plan overnight. They waited for the right woman to launch the right war. That's what they did. And it was brilliant. It was a ruthless strategic move as well. And most importantly, did it work? When we think of Rosa Parks, we do think of an older lady who was a seamstress with tired feet and not the strong activist and the voice in the community that she really was. Why is that? Because narratives work to move emotions. And if you truly knew what was going on behind the scenes, it wouldn't build up the same level of emotions. But I wish that was the only reason why they picked Rosa. Because I was also told that it had a lot to do with the fact that she was light-skinned that she was biracial, or she appeared to be, and that tend to resonate more. So it's like go with the lighter skinned girl versus the darker skinned girl because that should resonate. But it also goes even deeper than that because thanks to historians of today, like Chad O. Jackson, we now have a better picture of what was going on at that time and why. You see, the Montgomery bus boycott is the cornerstone of the modern American civil rights narrative. It's a triumphant, unifying victory for freedom. That's the way it's presented. In the vessel that forced Martin Luther King Jr. into a national spotlight. But what if I told you that the history that we revere wasn't the step forward at all? What if it was the exact moment a community was steered off of a cliff? So here's a different perspective. That voices like Chad O. Jackson, who happens to be a professional plumber, filmmaker, and a nonpartisan commentator, he looked back at Montgomery, and you don't see it as the victory as they presented it. They see it as a calculated political maneuver, one that sacrificed true independence for a deeply subversive agenda. The boycott didn't just integrate buses or try to integrate buses because it really didn't even do that. What it really did, and I will say this is the sole thing that it did, and you'll see why in a little bit, is that it catapulted Martin Luther King Jr. and his inner circle into national prominence, much like what we see today with these movements and these protests. However, they weren't just fighting for a seat at the front of the bus. They were advancing a social gospel, an ideology that contradicted traditional and foundational Christian values. By framing the struggle through a lens that was heavily influenced by Marxist ideology, the movement wasn't just about civil rights. It was a strategic campaign designed to massively expand the power of the federal government, placing the ultimate authority in the hands of the state. It caused a shift away from self-reliance. Decades before the bus boycott stopped running in Montgomery, leaders like Booker T. Washington provided a different blueprint. Washington's philosophy was simple. It didn't require being hosed or fighting dogs and police officers. His blueprint was bulletproof. It was to master a trade, build economic independence, and cultivate uncompromising moral character. Those were the three things that Booker T. Washington stood on and believed that that was the focus of the Black community. That should have been the focus of the Black community. But the 1950s and the 1960s marked a tragic, fatal pivot. Instead of continuing to build thriving, parallel economies and self-sufficient communities, the civil rights movement changed the goal. The focus shifted to begging for inclusion in white-owned systems. The Black community traded the armor of self-reliance for the chains of government dependency. And if you look at the landscape today, the modern concepts of wokeness and the hyperfixation on systemic racism and movements like Black Lives Matter, where did it all start? By revering events like the Rosa Parks boycott as the ultimate template for action. We promote this perpetual victim mentality, and it traps an entire demographic in a false, exhausting narrative that they're inherently and permanently oppressed by an American system. That's what it did. It removed us from self-reliance to dependency. And if you fast forward to today, the technology has changed, but the playbook is exactly the same. Only now, the machines that are hijacking the movements aren't always fighting for your civil rights. Sometimes they're just mining your political capital. Take the recent Target boycott. Now, how did it start? It started out as a grassroots boycott. Everyday people, local activists, parents, mostly Black women, who saw merchandise fundamentally, they saw that merchandise fundamentally disagreed with what they believed. They felt like there was a disenfranchisement amongst Black business owners in their products. And they filmed it, they shared it. It was organic, it was unpolished frustration of the consumer, and it took off. And that is really the catalyst of this Target boycott, where you saw a lot of Black people not shopping at Target. But particularly Black women were those who led the movement to stop shopping at Target in protest. And sales did begin to drop. And there were a number of businesses who suffered, mostly Black businesses, because think about it, right? If you're selling, let's just say, hair care products for ethnic hair, and now your customer base is protesting, every month that business owner has to justify why their products are still on the shelf is another month that they are getting closer and closer to not being on that shelf. But watch what happened next. So this organic movement gets spotted on the radar of these professional political machines. Much like the movements of the young women before Rosa Parks, but all of that effort now became a little bit on display, and now those who had the influence decided they want to jump on. The political machines. Now, suddenly, community leaders with massive platforms, millions of followers, and ties to much larger political missions stepped in. And they didn't just join the boycott, they hijacked it. They rebranded it to focus on faith-based organizations and leaders and supporters. They monetized it and collected thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars. They turned local frustration into a national fundraising tool. They turned this into a talking point for the next election cycle. They then became the face of the movement that they did not start, much like in the Rosa Parks era. And then it vanished. Target quietly shuffled some inventory, the news cycles flipped, and the leaders who hijacked the movement suddenly stopped talking about it, claiming that at first they got 3 of the 4 demands that they requested were met. Then it turned to 2 of the 4 demands. And this is after Jamal Bryant met with the Target CEO. I wonder what that meeting was like. But why did this happen? Because the mission wasn't actually about the store. The mission was about the momentum. Once the political points were scored, once the bigger agenda was fed, once the boycott was shut down by the very people who amplified it, the grassroots activists who started it were left holding the bag, wondering, where did their army go? But see, you have to understand, a boycott is a weapon. In the 1950s, that weapon was wielded by brilliant strategists waiting patiently for the perfect plaintiff to pull the trigger. Well, today, the weapon is often wielded by political opportunists who harvest your genuine outrage to feed their own agendas, only to drop the cause the second it's no longer useful. So the next time you're told to stop buying something, or to start marching in a street, or to start joining in some digital mob, take a step back, look at the past outrage, and ask yourself, who's really steering this ship? And what is their actual destination? And then who's going to benefit from this? And in case you were wondering, the Montgomery bus boycott didn't end because the city of Montgomery or the bus company finally listened to the protesters and demanded that they would compromise. In fact, the city fought the boycott relentlessly, even passing laws to make the carpool system illegal. And the boycott ended because of a definite legal victory that had absolutely nothing to do with them. While the massive protests were starving the bus companies of revenue, it wasn't so much that they had to shut down. But simultaneously, there was a civil rights attorney who was fighting a battle in court that did not include Rosa Parks. They filed a federal lawsuit called Browder versus Gale. As mentioned earlier, this case used Claudette, Orella Bowder, Susie McDonald, and Mary Louise Smith as the plaintiffs to directly challenge the unconstitutionality of the segregation laws. So, in other words, if they had just not boycotted, but allowed this case to go forward, everything would have been fine. Because in November of 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld a ruling that Alabama state and local laws required segregated buses was unconstitutional. And the boycott officially ended the day after the Supreme Court's mandate arrived in Montgomery, legally forcing the city to integrate its transit system. So yes, the boycott may have pulled some revenue from bus companies, but was it necessary? Could they have gotten behind the federal lawsuit? Nope. You know why? Because there was no national attention on that lawsuit. There was no money to be made by supporting what was already happening. They had to hijack it. They had to create their own thing. There are so many snapshots in time, so many moments of great emotion and passion. But there are also historical facts and grifters and false teachers whose mission is not the uplifting of the community, if it doesn't mean uplifting themselves first. So this midterm, Black voters are walking into booth with more information. They're walking into the booth with understanding and a resolve to vote differently. But it all means nothing if we don't take this voting block seriously. So after the break, I'm closing with my message to the Republican Party as well as to Black voters. We're almost finished. You're listening to the Janelle King Show right here on Extra 106.3. Don't leave the table. Welcome back. I'm Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. In today's table topic, we're talking about the Black vote in the midterms. If you're just joining us for the first time, don't worry. You can catch the encore episode Sunday at 9 a.m. right here on Extra 106.3, or you can join us on YouTube or podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. You know, we've been breaking down the number one question that's on a lot of voters' minds, which is what is going to happen in these midterms? The answer lies with the new swing vote. I do believe that the Black vote is going to change the outcome of the midterms. And in the past portion of the show, we dismantled the myth that the Black vote is a monolith. We walked through the history of how the Black vote has shifted from the Republican Party which was the party of Lincoln, to the Democrat Party, and why the 60-year Democrat or nothing spell is finally breaking. Today, young Black men and women are looking at their bank accounts, they're demanding safe communities, and they're rejecting the identity politics that takes their loyalty for granted. We also shined the light on the quiet culture war that's happening behind the scenes between respectability politics versus Black fatigue. We talked about the return of personal accountability and the growing exhaustion within the subculture that glorifies the lowest common denominator of our community. But most importantly, we pulled back the curtain on the business of outrage, from the calculated strategic optics of the Rosa Parks Montgomery bus boycott to the modern-day hijacking of the Target protests by opportunists like Jamal Bryant. And we looked at the hard truth that history is engineered, that boycotts are weapons, and that too often our genuine grassroots frustration is harvested by gatekeepers to feed a bigger political agenda, only to be abandoned when it's no longer useful to them. So what does this all mean as we head into the ballot box this November? It means that the days of blind loyalty are over and that Black voters are walking into the voting booth with more information, more understanding, and a fierce resolve to demand actual results. So I want to leave you with my thoughts. We spent a lot of the hour talking about the awakening, and we've talked about the shift, the history, The reality that the Black vote is no longer a guaranteed lock-in vote for the left. But recognizing the shift isn't enough. Both sides of this equation have work to do. So I have two messages, one to the Republican Party and one to the Black voters making this transition. So let's start with the GOP. If you truly want to secure this new swing vote, you have to fundamentally change how you view and pursue the Black community. First, you have to lose the stereotype. You have to stop looking at Black America through the lens of the ratchet subculture the media loves to highlight. We are not what is portrayed on the television screen in many cases. Many of those voters will always vote blue because there's no desire to leave. No matter the zip code, no matter the income level, or the vast majority of our community that's fed up, there's a lot of voters that are feeding into that subculture who will vote Democrat. But there's a vast majority of our community who is made up of self-reliant, hardworking mothers and fathers and citizens who simply want to live a good life, raise strong families, and leave a legacy. And when you speak to us, speak to that reality. Secondly, compete for the vote. Stop treating the Black vote like it's unattainable. Stop treating it as if it's a box to check 6 weeks before the general election. You must go after the Black vote with the exact same tenacity, the same funding, the same strategic dedication that you use to court the pro-life voters or the evangelical base. If we are the new swing vote, you must earn it. And lastly, please stop helping us. To quote the great Jason Riley, that was the name of his book, by the way, we are entirely capable of standing on our own 2 feet. Stop helping us by creating new avenues of dependency just to prove that you care. We don't need a conservative version of a handout. Instead, assist us by simply not placing barriers in our way. Cut the red tape, lower taxes, kill the overregulation, and handle us exactly the way you will handle everyone else. Now to my Black voters. If you're waking up and if you're walking away from the party of dependency, you need to understand what you're walking into. You are not leaving a system that told you, no. You are leaving a system that told you that you were the victim and you needed saving, that prioritized you, that created space for you in those terms. Now you're stepping into an arena that demands self-reliance. You must develop a new level of confidence and self-assurance to get in the game. The training wheels are off. No one is going to lower the standard for you. And honestly, you shouldn't want them to. You are to build to compete. And quite frankly, you are built to win on merit. Let's be real. Yes, there will be times when you fail, when you lose, when you face a setback, and that lingering thought will creep in. You know, the one that says, I wonder if race played a role in me not getting that job. I wonder if race is why they treat me differently. I wonder if race is why I have to constantly prove that I'm Republican. Yeah, all of that may happen. But it is what you do with that thought that matters. Do not let it become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Do not use it as an excuse to quit. Instead, you ignore it. You square your shoulders and you keep pushing despite the challenge. True freedom isn't just about who you vote for. It's about taking full ownership of your life, your family, and your future. Because the political ground is shifting. Make sure you're standing on a solid rock when it settles. Until next time, stay unafraid, stay unapologetic, and never stop seeking the truth.